Hi everyone, Matti here. So in last episode, we saw how we can use Spring Boot to create web applications. And now we want to start using different libraries that are integrated into Spring Boot that will help us accelerate the development of our application. This particular library that we're going to see today, it's called Spring Data, and it helps us connect to the database without having to do a lot of coding. It has a lot of nice code generation tools for us. So it's an amazing tool that you will really appreciate, and it will accelerate your development. All right, let's start with the basics. What is Spring Data? Spring Data is a library that can be used to connect your Spring application to a database. It can be a relational database or a non-relational one. And Spring Boot is also integrated with Spring Data to access to the database. So we're going to be using Spring Boot and Spring Data to create a new application. So why use Spring Data? It has a lot of advantages. It simplifies the data access, so how we can access the database. It enables you to develop way faster. It creates an abstraction layer, and it can support multiple data sources. So you can have multiple data sources in the same application with this abstraction layer that is provided by Spring Data. It also creates automatically the repositories. So you don't have to create the code for each database query because this code is extremely repetitive. So Spring generates that in runtime for you. It enables you to create custom queries really easily. And it also allows you to implement caching. It enables transaction management when you have to do modifications in multiple tables, and you need to make sure that all these modifications are done in a transactional way, so that if something fails in one table, then the whole transaction is aborted and rolled back. And finally, it's in the Spring community and ecosystem. So it has a vast community of support, thanks that it is a Spring project. So we're going to be building a tutorial application, and this application is a restaurant delivery app. And this is going to be built with Spring Boot and Spring Data, and basically we'll have restaurants, and each restaurant will have menu items, and we'll be able to create new restaurants and new menu items for the restaurants. It will be a simple application, but the idea is to show how Spring Data works, how you can map your classes into tables in the database, and how all this works together. So I'm going to be creating a new application, and for this I'm going to use the Spring Initializer, which is really helpful to create new Spring Boot applications. So I'm going to write just here restaurants Spring Boot, and I'm going to use Java, and I'm going to use Maven, and the group is going to be programming with Matti restaurants. Okay, and the package name, let's just leave it at restaurants. And I'm going to be using Java 21, which is the latest version of Java, and that's it. So now I need to select the different dependencies I'll be using. So I'm going to select Spring Web, because it's going to be a web app. And I'm going to use Spring Data JPA, because I'm going to be using MySQL. And finally, I'm going to add time lift. This is for my UI. And that's it. So I click on create. Okay, so for our tutorial, we're going to create these two tables in our database. We'll have the restaurant table, which has an ID, the name of the restaurant, and an email. And then we'll have a menu item. And the menu item will have an ID. It will have the name of the menu item, the description, the price, and finally, we'll have the restaurant ID, which tells us for which restaurant this menu item is. So we see that there is a relationship between restaurant and menu item, and the relationship is 1 to many. So this one restaurant could have at least, it could have 0 or multiple menu items. So this is the database that we are creating. Now, if we go to our code, I've done a little bit of setup. I just did two main things. One is I am using Docker Compose because I'm going to be using MySQL for our database, and I don't want to install a particular version of MySQL, so I'm going to use it running on Docker. If you don't know what Docker is and how it works, you don't really need to know anything about that for this tutorial, but you at least need to have Docker running in your local. So if you don't have it, you go and install Docker, and then you can go to your terminal on the project and simply run Docker compose up, and this will run the database. But before you do that, let me show you that I already I'm going to create all the tables for you. So the tables that we just discussed here, these ones, are going to be created here. I'm going to have this schema named food, and I'm telling MySQL to use this schema, and then I'm creating the table restaurant, which has an ID, and it's an auto increment big integer. This is the primary key, and I'm going to be having the name, which is a varchar, and the email, which is another varchar. And then we'll have also a table for the menu items. And then I have a lot of inserts because this is sample data for us. So we can insert a few restaurants that are sample data and also menu items for those restaurants. So then if I run the Docker Compose now, I write Docker Compose up, and this will run MySQL for me. So we see it's creating the MySQL server, and it's done, and now MySQL is starting to load. So I have IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, so I can go to this tab right here, and I can see the service running in Docker. So everything is fine, everything is working fine. And now what I can do is, because I'm using IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, I can connect to the database from IntelliJ. So that's easily done. I just go to here. You see where there's this database icon. I click on this, and then I go here and I go data source and basically click on MySQL. If you don't find MySQL here, maybe it's here because you recently used it. So I go there, and in here the data that you need to fill is basically host has to be localhost because you're communicating with the MySQL instance running in your local. Then the port is the default port. I didn't change that. The user is going to be root, and the password is going to be root. And the database, which is the schema, we're going to be using food. I can test this connection now, and you can see we have succeeded in our connection. So I'll apply this and OK. So I can see now a database connection here. So if I refresh this, I can see the two tables, restaurants. So I can double click here and it will show me a sample of the data. And I can also do the same with the menu items, and I can see all the menu items that I have inserted. So you see, like I have like 5 menu items for the restaurant 1 and 5 menu items for restaurant 2 and so on. So this is all sample data for us. Now what we had to do is, because we used a Spring initializer to create the project, we already have the Spring dependencies and we don't have to worry about adding those dependencies. So the next thing is we could go and create our data model. So I'm going to create a new package here. I'm going to say model, and basically I'll start with the menu item, because the menu item is the one that doesn't have the relationship. So let's start with menu item. And so I create this class. It's called menu item. And as we said, the menu item has a long, because it's a big integer, long ID. It has a name, so I'm going to use string for the name. It has a description. Then it has a price. For price, because it's money, I'm going to be using big decimal. Price. And finally, we had the ID of the restaurant. So restaurant ID. You see? Very simple. And now that I have this one, I can create my restaurant. So new class, restaurant. And the restaurant is a very simple class. It has private long ID, private string name, private string, what was it? Email, and private, and we're going to put the list of menu items in the restaurant. All right. So now that we have all these, what I'm going to do is, in our two classes, I'm going to create the constructors, and we're going to be needing, because of how Spring Data works, we're going to be needing an empty constructor. And then I'm going to create a constructor with all the fields because I like that. If you don't know how I'm doing this, it's basically I'm clicking on Command N, and this brings me the menu to generate code. So I can generate getters, setters, constructors. So I'm going to generate the getters as well, getter and setters for this. And finally, I'm going to generate the hash code and equals. And that's it. So everything is generated for me. And now I'm going to restaurant. And in restaurant, I'm going to say it's the same constructor, and I'm generating the empty constructor. I'm going to generate the constructor with all the fields. I'm going to generate getters and setters. And finally, hash code and equals. And that's it. So everything is generated for us. Excellent. So now how do we tell Spring Data that these classes are related to that table? to those tables. So how do we tell it? This is the way we can tell it. So let's start with the menu item, which is the simpler. First thing we need to tell Spring Data is that this is an entity. So I'm going to use the annotation entity. You see? And now this has a name, and this is the name of the table. Our table is called menu underscore item. Okay. So now there is an error here. It's telling me there is no primary key for this. So I need to add the ID annotation. So I'm going to add the annotation here, ID, and I'm going to tell Spring Data that this is auto-generated, that we don't need Spring Data to generate it, or that we are not going to be generating it on our own. So this is a generated value, and the strategy we are going to use identity, which is the way we should the one we should use in MySQL. Okay, so the way Spring Data can connect the fields of the entity is by basically matching the names. So this one has a match with the menu item column called ID, and the same with name, for example. This one matches with this one, and then we have price that matches with this one, but restaurant ID doesn't match exactly because this one has an underscore and this one doesn't have anything. So to fix this, I'm going to add an annotation here, column, and this has a name attribute, the same as entity, and I'm going to call this restaurant ID. So I can assign the data source here, for example, and this will make us our life easier. Now it points to this, you see? Okay. So, and that's it. That's how we mapped this entity into this table. So now Spring Data knows that this is connected to this table. Now we're going to do the same, but with the restaurant. So in the case of the restaurant, it's a bit more complex because we have a relationship. So let's start with the easy part. The entity here is going to be name, and the name is restaurant. Easy. Now we have to add the ID column, so ID, and then generated value, strategy, and the strategy, remember, has to be identity. So generation type identity. This is because we're using MySQL. Okay, fine. So now everything seems to be okay, but this one, it's complaining. So how do we fix this? We have to add an annotation. First, we have to add one, which is it tells Spring Data about this relationship. So I'm going to say one to many. So this is a one-to-many relationship. One restaurant can have many menu items. And now, once that I have that, I'm going to have to add a few descriptions for this relationship. So there's one thing called the fetch argument. Fetch, if you see here, we have two options, eager or lazy. And this is a distinction that will tell Spring Data how to load this data. It means, do you want me to load all the elements in the list with the main entity? Or do you want to just load the main entity and then whenever you need the elements of the collection, we do more queries. And this is for this scenario, which is a very simple scenario, we're going to be using eager, which means I want to load everything with the initial query. I don't want to have one entity and then the rest of the list all with successive queries. This would be the lazy option. The lazy option is very useful if you are working in an environment where, let's say, you have every restaurant has, I don't know, thousands of menu items, and you just want to have the list. You don't want to load everything in memory because it's a lot of data, and also you don't really need the whole list all the time. You just need a few items of the list. So in those cases, lazy would be better. But in our case, we're going to be using eager because we really need them. Okay. Then we have the target entity. This one is simple. It's a menu item. Sometimes this is not required because Spring can infer it from here, but we just put it. And the last one is I'm going to it's called Cascade, and it will tell Spring Data to update. Whenever I update the restaurant, it has to update the menu items as well. So Cascade type all. And the other thing that we need to have here is the join column. It's a different annotation. It's not part of the one-to-many. So we put join column, and we're going to say name, restaurant ID, restaurant ID. So now this is mapped to the menu items restaurant ID. So we are telling Spring Data this is a column that you need to join both restaurant and menu items. So now we are completed in our mapping. Now that we have our mapping all done, we'll go ahead and we'll create our controller. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create the controller, which is called restaurant controller, right? And this is going to be a controller. If you don't know what this is, you can look at the previous tutorials on Spring Boot. But basically we're telling Spring this is going to handle HTTP calls. And we are going to add a, sorry, not this, request mapping. So this will handle anything related to restaurants. Okay. And let's create a view which will show us a restaurant. So let's say public, no, it's get mapping first. And we're going to put here /ID, which will be the ID of the restaurant. And then we're going to say public string view restaurant. So as we saw in our tutorial with Spring Boot and Thymeleaf, we have to receive here the path parameter as a path variable, right? And we're going to put it ID. So now these two are linked. And string ID. And then model. So I had to import this class, the Spring Framework UI model. I misspelled this. I'm struggling today with the spelling of restaurants. Okay. Now that I have everything here, now I can, what I have to do is first, in my model, I need to add the restaurant that I want to see. But which one it is, I had to look it up in the database. So for now, let's just put a restaurant that we create. Okay, let's import the class. And we can, yeah, let's just create it with some random data for now. We can use the ID that is passed as parameter, and we can say restaurant1 and rest1 at example.com, and that's it. Oh, and we are missing the menu items. So new, so list of new menu item. Let's just put 1 for the sake of simplicity. 1, and the name is going to be burger. Description, burger, and finally, let's just put burger description. The price, 1, and restaurant ID is the ID. Good. So we have added this into our model. And now we have to return the view that we want to show, which we haven't created, but we'll just put restaurant view. And it's complaining here because we haven't really set this. Why is this not working? Oh, ID, and this should be a long, sorry. Yeah, so now this should be working. So if I go now to my resources, I have my templates here, and I had to create a new template. So I'm going to say restaurant view HTML. Right, so I already have created the view because I don't want to waste time in the view, but let's just go through it quickly. As we saw in our Spring Boot tutorial, in this view we can use Thymeleaf to access, you see, the different data in our model. So in our model we have restaurant. Why is it not in our model? Let's see. Restaurant controller. It's because I have misspelled restaurant here. So now we should have this. You see, it's a restaurant, so it has a name. So the title of the page is going to be restaurant name. And the same here, we're going to show the name of the restaurant. And finally, we'll see the button to add a new menu item, but we're not using it so far. So I'm going to comment this part, and then we have the menu items here. So we have restaurant menu item, and each item we're going to iterate through each item, and we're going to create a list of items. And this list will have the item name, the description, and the price. Very easy. Okay. So now we should be in a position that we can run this. Let's see. So we're having an error here. And this error is because we haven't configured the database. I didn't think that this would happen because we're not actually using the database so far, but yeah, this has to be done before. So in our resource, we have an application properties, and this file we'll have to add the following properties. I already have these properties, so I'm going to add them directly, and I'm going to explain it to you. So the first property here is telling telling Spring, do you need me to generate the database for you? And we're telling it no. Then which is the URL of the database, so the connection string. You have to use JDBC as the protocol, MySQL, localhost 3306, and then the name of the database, the username and the password, as we did when we did the connection. And finally, what is the driver that we are going to use? This is the class that you have to use if you want to connect to MySQL. So this is called the driver, and this tells JDBC how to connect to MySQL. Okay. So now that we have configured the application properties, let's see if we can run it again. It's not finding the driver, and the reason is because I haven't added the driver. So I'm sorry, I apologize for that, but I need to add the driver here. So let's just have it very quickly. Let me look it up because I don't remember exactly the name. I think it's this one. So it's called MySQL connector J. This will add the driver. So let's see if now this is fixed. And yes, our problem is now fixed. We can run the application again. Okay, so now it's finally running. So let's test our endpoint. So we should be able to go to localhost restaurants and put whatever ID we want. And we see that we have a restaurant and it has a menu item. So congratulations, we're done. I'm just kidding. We just started. Now that we have this, we need to be able to load this data from the database. We don't want this static data. If I put always the same here, so I put the ID 2, I want a different restaurant, but I'm not getting it. So I want to get this data from the database. How do I do that? Let's go here, and we'll have to create a new interface that will allow us to connect to the database. This new interface is going to be called restaurant repository. Okay, it's going to be an interface. It has to be an interface because this is the cool thing about Spring. Spring will create the implementation of this interface dynamically. I need to put the repository tag here, and I need to extend a particular class, a particular interface called CRUD repository. CRUD comes from create, update, delete. So I'm going to have the CRUD repository here, and I'm going to, it receives two type parameters. One is the type, which is restaurant, and the other is the key, the type of the key. So that is long, because the restaurant ID is a long. Okay? So now that we have this, we can use it. This is a Spring Bean, as you can see here. As we saw in our tutorials, this can be auto-wired directly now in our REST controller. In our controller, sorry. So if I put here private final restaurant controller, restaurant repository, sorry, and I initialize it with a constructor, I can put auto-wired if I want. Not that I need it, but just to be clear. So now we can see that this is injected, you see? And it tells me it's this interface. So now Spring will implement this interface. And because this interface is already extending an existing interface from Spring, it comes with a vast list of methods. This interface has methods like save, which creates an object into the database, or it updates an existing one. It has the ability to find from the database, so I can basically call it like this. Now, instead of creating it here, we are going to load it from the database. So to load it from the database, we are going to use the repository, and we're going to say find by ID. And we're sending the ID as a parameter. Now, if you see, this returns an optional, so it might not be there. There might not be a restaurant with this ID. So in the case that we have a problem with this, in the case that the value is not there, we're just simply going to throw an exception. So we'll assign this to a restaurant variable. So you see we have a restaurant. If you don't know how optional works, I'll leave you a link to my tutorial on functional programming and optional and all that. So we can use this now here. And now, if I reload this, this should immediately go into the database. So now we are not creating some static data here. We're going to the database to look for the data. So let's try it. Okay. We should be able to go into the database now. If I put the ID 1, okay, we have Cafe Delight, burger, pizza, pasta. So let's see if this one is right. If I go to here, restaurant, Cafe Delight is the one, and the items. Yes, these are the items. So it's working. That's great. If I use the 2, sushi sensation, and that was the 2, right? Yes. So we can see that we're getting to the database. So what happens if I use a value that is not in the database, like 10? We get an exception. This is because I am throwing an exception in the case I can't find it. You see here? If I can't find it, throw an exception. So let's go here and let's see again. Now let's say we want to create a new restaurant because we don't want to just see existing restaurants. We want to create a new one. How do we do that? All right, to create a new restaurant, I'm going to be using a new method in the restaurant controller here. And I'm going to call it, let's just call it create restaurant. Just create, I think, for simplicity. So public string create restaurant, and this is going to receive a model, and that's it. And in this model, we are going to put an attribute, and basically we're going to put an empty restaurant because we want TimeLift to receive an empty restaurant that it can fill with information, and it can map the attributes of the restaurant to the form, because we're going to be sending a form with the name of the restaurant and the email of the restaurant, and this form then is going to be transformed again into a restaurant that we will save into the database. So, and this is going to return the create restaurant view, which I have already created. So I have it here. I have created this file, and this file has, let's go through it very quickly, is the page that is going to be showing the form. So the title is create restaurant, and it has then this header here, and finally I have the form, and the form has the method post, because as you can see in the REST controller, I'm using I'm using get. I should be using post mapping. Okay. Oh, no, sorry. This is get. This is fine. But I'm using post here because now I have to create a new method for saving. So if I want to save this, I have to create a new method. So the form is going to be submitted into this new method. So you see, and the object that is being mapped to this form is the restaurant, the empty restaurant that we created. So this empty restaurant is being mapped, its different attributes. For example, the name of we have an input for the name, which is mapped to the restaurant name, and we have an input for the email, which is mapped to the email. Very simple. And finally, we have a submit button. So we're good to go, I think, with this. Oh no, sorry. We have to create this save method. So if I go to the REST controller, I have to create the same method, which we said it's a post mapping, and we're just calling it save. Okay, and then we say public string save restaurant, and it's receiving. This is going to receive an actual restaurant object. This can be called model attribute, so that we don't have to access the model directly. The type is restaurant, and then we are going to receive the model anyway, and because we're going to return this restaurant so that we can see it in the UI. So let's call it model. First we're going to save the restaurant. And how do we save it? We have to use again the restaurant repository, which is really simple to use. It has a method called save, and we just simply call this like this. We pass the restaurant, and now it's going to be saved. And this is going to return a restaurant. Let's just call it saved restaurant. What's the difference between this one and this one? This one has an auto-generated ID so that we can use it in our future things. So now we're going to return the saved one, and we're going to be using the same view as in the restaurant view, so because we want to see the newly created one. So this is all set, so we should be able to restart our application and see if it works. Okay, So we have to go to restaurants, create. This is create. And here we have the form. And now that we have the form, let's just call it brilliant. And the email brilliant@example.com. And submit. Let's see if we inspect this form, we can see it goes to restaurant/save and the method is post. So let's submit it, and now we can see the restaurant. We cannot see the menu items because it doesn't have any. So we want to add menu items. So how do we add them? That is an excellent question, and let's just stop for a little bit and think of everything we've done so far, because it's a lot. If we go to our controller, we have been using the restaurant repository, but we don't really have any implementation for this because Spring has been implementing these methods dynamically. So Spring already has an implementation of the save method and of the find by ID method, but how does Spring know what to use, like what code to use and how to map everything to the database and so on and so on. So Spring is really smart, but we have to help it a little bit. So that's where the annotations come into play. Spring knows that this restaurant class is related to the restaurant table, and it also knows how to do the join so that it can bring all the menu items using this ID. So this is how, with the annotations and very simple configuration, we can do the access and the saving into the database. So you can see the power of this. You don't really need to do a lot of coding, and you can have a full stack application already, which has its own database, it has a server, it has a client in the browser. It's just really powerful. And there is a lot more that we can do on Spring Data. For example, one of the things that it allows you to do is we can create custom query methods. So let's say we want to find restaurants by name instead of by ID. We don't have a query for that, but we can create it if we want. We could create something like restaurant, something that is returning a restaurant, and we just say find one, because we're asking for only one, by name. And we have to pass the name as a parameter. And that's it. So now we can use this method in our controller to find restaurants by name. And this is because Spring has a convention in the name of the methods. Let's say we want to find many. So let's say, I don't know, we want to find a list of restaurants, right? So we put the result is a list, and we can say find all by name containing, and we could say so this one will return all of the restaurants that contain a particular string in their name. And just by following this convention, which is well documented in the project, but Also, if you have IntelliJ, it's really easy because IntelliJ auto completes. So you can chain this with multiple other conditions if you want. And IntelliJ will help you in creating these conditions. So this is really powerful. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg. But let's just go on with our tutorial. So now we said, okay, we want to add also menu items. So how do we do that? If we go to our create view, no, sorry, our restaurant view, I have commented this, but I'm going to uncomment. This is basically a list of buttons, and in this button, we can see this button is going to be the button to add new menu items, and I have this URL. So basically restaurants/id/create menu item. So I'm going to have here a new page, which is get mapping, and this is going to be id/create menu item, public string create menu, sorry, let's just call it view create menu item, and this has to receive the ID. So I'm going to say this is a path variable ID, which is a long, and then the model, and I'm going to find this restaurant. Sorry, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be saying model add attribute and menu item, and I'm going to create a new menu item. But before putting it into the context in the model, I'm going to just call it this menu item, and let's say menu item dot set restaurant ID, because we want this for our view. So now we have a restaurant ID attached to our menu item, and return create menu item view. As always, I already have this view already created as well, so I'm going to copy it here, create menu item view, and this one is very similar to create restaurant view, only it has more fields, but it's calling this has to be method post, and it's going to call restaurants menu item save, and the object is the menu item, and we're mapping the fields here. So you see menu item, the description, and the restaurant ID we're mapping to a hidden field because we already have that and we want to keep it there so that we can repost it. So this should work. Now we can create this method that will receive the menu item. So this method is menu item slash save. So let's go. We had in our restaurant view, we had restaurants ID create menu item, and now we are going in our create menu item is menu item slash save. So let's go here, and it's post mapping, and should be slash menu item slash save public string save menu item. And we have to use model attribute again, as we did here in restaurant. So model attribute menu item model. Fine. Now we do now we had to save the menu item, but to save the menu item we will use the restaurant repository. We'll load the restaurant, add the menu item, and then finally save the whole restaurant together, and we can return to the view restaurant view, which is the one that we want to see. So let's to do this, we are going to do restaurant find by ID, and in the menu item we have the restaurant ID. So, and we have to say or else throw, and we have our restaurant. So now we can do restaurant dot get menu items. So this is a list of menu items, and now we're going to add it. And finally, we're going to save the restaurant. So restaurant equals restaurant repository save. And now we have the new state of the restaurant here with the new menu item and everything. So now we can do model.add attribute restaurant, and this is the restaurant view. We're going to return restaurant view because we want to see the restaurant with all the new item as well. So I think everything is fine now. I don't think we're missing anything. Let's see. I'm going to restart. Okay. So let's see our restaurant. So restaurant 6 should be the new one. Brilliant. Now we have the add menu item button. We can see it on other restaurants as well. So see. So let's go to Brilliant. And let's add, the name would be Espresso. Delicious coffee. And the price is $2.50. So if we submit this should go to the new method in the controller and save the new menu item, and then we should see the menu item. Excellent. So we see it. So now if we want to add a new one, let's say croissant and 3. Excellent, guys. Everything is working. So let's see, for example, let's just go to another restaurant and add data. Sushi sensation. So let's add here, what can we add to a sushi restaurant? Wasabi. Applicable. And 1. That should be fair enough. Okay, good. So we can add data to our objects, and we can see this working actually in the database. So if I go to restaurants, we'll see Brilliant. Oh, I have it twice. I think it's because we run this tutorial a few times. But let's delete one. And then I have the different new items that we have been adding. And this one's for the restaurant 6 and this one's for restaurant 2. So what do you think? This is amazing. And this is the power of Spring Data. Alright guys, so what did you think about this tutorial? I mean, I find these kind of things, when it's the first time that you use them, you think, wow, this is magic. And it's really, really good. It's a great way to get started with any application. So if you have an application idea and you want to get started and you want to do things and try things using Spring Boot with Spring Data, this is an amazing way to get started very quickly. You can create very nice Java applications with it, and it's so customizable that you can create really complex things with it as well. So I really encourage you to keep looking into it, and in our next episodes we're going to keep working on this and adding other Spring components like Spring security and different roles. So for example, having users that can create orders and not only being able to create restaurants and menu items. So we'll be going to be doing all of that. But if you enjoy these videos, remember to subscribe to the channel and to like the video, share, comment. Everything helps for me to keep doing these videos, which I really enjoy. Even though I have limited time, this is really, really good for me. I really enjoy doing it. I really enjoy the feedback I get from you as well. So that's all for today, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Bye.